When narcissists get sexually transmitted diseases, they often do these disgusting things. You may have heard about narcissists blaming everyone but themselves. You may even have experienced it firsthand, watching them twist the truth to avoid accountability, shift blame and manipulate others into believing they were the real victim. But what happens when the narcissist gets something he can't hide behind charm or rewrite with lies? What happens when he contracts an illness that exposes his behavior, not just to you but to the world? A sexually transmitted disease doesn't just affect the body, it affects reputation, it challenges image, and for a narcissist, that's a nightmare. In this video, we'll reveal what narcissists often do when they get STDs, behaviors that are not only shocking, but deeply disturbing. We'll explore how they try to cover up their condition, how they react to betrayal by their own bodies, and why they often turn to manipulation, denial, and even spreading disease without remorse. This isn't just about health, it's about psychology, about ego, about the way narcissists respond when they're forced to face consequences they can't control. If you've ever wondered whether narcissists take responsibility for their actions, even when faced with undeniable proof, you're about to find out. Because when a narcissist gets a sexually transmitted disease, they don't just panic about their health, they panic about their image, their power, and their ability to keep up appearances. And the things they do next? You won't believe it. So if you're ready to understand the twisted ways narcissists handle shame, sickness, and exposure, keep watching. Because knowledge is protection. And once you know what they're capable of, you'll never fall for their games again. Let's begin. If you're here, it means you've either lived through the pain of being manipulated by a narcissist, or you're trying to understand what happens when they face consequences they can't hide from. Either way, you're not alone. Millions of people struggle with the emotional aftermath of narcissistic abuse, and many of them don't realize that the damage doesn't always stop at psychological harm. Before we dive into the heart of this topic, let's take a moment to connect. If you found this content helpful, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with others who might benefit from it. Awareness is the first step toward healing, and by spreading the word, you're helping others break free from cycles of emotional manipulation and destruction. Now, let's start with the most unsettling truth. Narcissists rarely take responsibility, even when they get sick from their own reckless behavior. Psychologists who work with narcissistic personality disorder describe a consistent pattern. Narcissists refuse to see themselves as flawed. Even when faced with clear evidence of their poor decisions, they deflect, deny, and distort reality to protect their self-image. Getting an STD is no different. Instead of seeing it as a consequence of their choices, of sleeping around, avoiding protection, or ignoring red flags, they look for someone else to blame. A partner who must have lied, a relationship that wasn't what it seemed, or worse, they claim to be victims of some kind of conspiracy or trap. They don't think, I made bad choices. They think, someone did this to me. Second, they begin to smear their past partners, desperately trying to spread blame. Once the diagnosis comes back, narcissists often go into damage control mode. They reach out to old lovers, exes, or even current partners, trying to determine where the infection came from. And instead of doing it privately or responsibly, they do it publicly. They accuse, they question, they threaten. Some even post anonymously online, searching for confirmation that someone else had the same disease before they did. Psychologists call this projection, the act of displacing one's own faults onto others. In this case, the narcissist wants to make sure that if he got an STD, it wasn't his fault. And more than that, he wants to make sure you know it wasn't his fault. Third, they become obsessed with hiding their condition at all costs. Narcissists live behind masks. Their identity is built on illusion, confidence, charm, superiority, and control. So when they get something like an STD, which threatens that image, they panic. Some lie to doctors. Some avoid testing altogether. Some delete medical records. Some pretend nothing happened. And if they must deal with treatment, they do so in secret. They won't tell anyone close. They won't warn potential partners. And in some cases, they'll continue having unprotected sex, because admitting they're sick feels like defeat. Fourth, they often spread the disease further without remorse or warning. One of the most dangerous behaviors psychologists observe in narcissists who contract STDs is the refusal to disclose their condition to future partners, not because they're unaware of the risk, but because they don't care. To them, their needs come first. Their desire to feel powerful, admired, and in control outweighs any concern for others' well-being. Some narcissists even justify it internally. She didn't ask. He should have used protection. They wanted it too much to care. It's not just recklessness, it's cruelty masked as entitlement. And it's one of the most disgusting things a narcissist does after getting a sexually transmitted disease. Fifth, they lash out, emotionally targeting those closest to them. Narcissists don't handle shame well. When they feel exposed, humiliated, or vulnerable, they strike out. And the people closest to them, especially those who once loved them, are the easiest targets. They may accuse you of giving it to them. They may guilt-trip you with threats of exposure. They may leak private information or photos to prove they aren't the only ones at fault. It's not about honesty. It's not about safety. It's about revenge. Sixth, they rewrite history to protect their ego, even about their own illness. Have you ever noticed how narcissists rarely admit mistakes? Even years later, they won't say, "I was wrong." Instead, they go over every interaction in their minds, twisting events so that they come out looking justified, misunderstood, or even victimized. This mental rewriting extends to their health. Suddenly, they remember every sexual encounter differently. Suddenly, they believe they were tricked, trapped, poisoned. And each time they replay these memories, they reinforce the narrative that paints them in the best possible light. You weren't hurt. You were careless. You didn't suffer. You were naive. You didn't warn them. You failed to protect yourself. By rewriting the past, they protect their ego. And as long as they can convince themselves that they were right and you were wrong, they can sleep at night. Seventh, they monitor your life obsessively, searching for signs you're suffering too. Despite everything they may say, despite the silence, the smear campaigns, the fake indifference, they think about you constantly. Not because they care, not because they regret hurting you, but because your absence created a void they can't fill. And now, after receiving a diagnosis they cannot erase, they search for proof that you're suffering too. They check your social media. They ask mutual friends about you. They try to provoke reactions. Because if they're sick, if they've been exposed, then they want to know you were affected too, that you carry the weight of their choices, that you're haunted by the same fear they now live with. Eighth, they suddenly claim to be faithful, just to restore their public image. After getting an STD, some narcissists dramatically change their behavior, not out of remorse, but out of necessity. They suddenly act loyal. They post pictures with the same partner repeatedly. They talk about love, commitment, and purity like they've always believed in them. But therapists point out that this is part of the cycle, a temporary shift designed to regain trust, restore reputation, and rebuild access to new sources of admiration. It's not sincerity, it's survival. It's another performance. Ninth, they become increasingly paranoid, blaming everyone but themselves. STDs bring a level of paranoia that goes beyond normal caution. Narcissists begin to suspect every person they've been with. They replay conversations. They analyze texts. They try to pinpoint exactly who gave them the disease, and then they seek retribution. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's public. Sometimes it's legal. But none of it is about protecting others. It's about punishing those who they believe ruined their perfect image. 10th, they begin to lose relationships fast as people start realizing the truth. Once word spreads, even subtly, about their condition, people begin to distance themselves. Friends grow quieter. Partners pull away. New connections become harder to build. And the narcissist begins to spiral. They become more desperate, more controlling, more erratic, more manipulative. Because losing admiration means losing power, and they will do anything to hold on to it, even if it means lying to the people closest to them. 11th, they start accusing others of cheating, even though they're the ones who spread the disease. Narcissists often believe that loyalty is owed to them, but not required from them. And when they receive a diagnosis, they immediately assume the worst about their partners. They accuse lovers of infidelity. They demand explanations. They stage dramatic confrontations. They create chaos to distract from their own guilt. It's not about truth. It's about shifting the spotlight. It's about making sure no one sees them as weak. 12th, they begin to isolate themselves emotionally while pretending to be stronger than ever. Though they outwardly boast about their strength, inside, narcissists are crumbling. Receiving a diagnosis they can't undo forces them to confront something they normally avoid: vulnerability. But instead of dealing with it honestly, they retreat. They withdraw from meaningful connection. They avoid intimacy. And when they do engage, it's transactional: sex without love, relationships without trust, encounters without boundaries. Therapists note that this phase often leads to deeper instability. Without real emotional support, narcissists become more unpredictable, more bitter, more prone to lashing out at those who still give them attention. 13th, they suddenly start preaching about purity, just to cover their own sins. Some narcissists, especially those who operate in religious or moral circles, start loudly condemning promiscuity, casual sex, and immorality, right after contracting an STD. They quote scripture. They speak about clean living. They judge others harshly. But none of it is genuine. None of it is about spiritual growth. It's about restoring their sense of superiority. It's about proving they're still above judgment by becoming the judge. 14th, they hoover former partners, desperately seeking reassurance they're still desired. As their confidence wavers, narcissists often return to old flames. They send cryptic messages. They drop hints about missed connections. They flirt. They flatter. They promise change. But it's not about love. It's not about healing. It's about needing validation that they are still attractive, still wanted, still powerful. Even while carrying an STD, they still expect admiration, still expect affection, still expect devotion. And if you offer even a sliver of reaction, they will try to pull you back in, regardless of the risk. 15th, they become obsessed with their own reflection, fearing they'll be seen as damaged. Narcissists define themselves by appearance, by charisma, by perceived perfection. And when they realize they've been marked by something they can't hide forever, they become consumed with how they're viewed. They worry about aging. They fear rejection. They obsess over looks. They spend more on grooming, fitness, and presentation. But beneath the surface, they are terrified of being exposed, of being labeled, of being rejected for who they really are. 16th, they begin to experience physical symptoms, but still refuse to accept responsibility. As the disease progresses, narcissists often ignore early warnings. They dismiss symptoms, they avoid treatment, and when they finally seek help, they frame it as a mystery, a cruel twist of fate, rather than a predictable outcome. And when they do start feeling the effects, they don't reflect, they don't change, they don't warn others. Instead, they double down. They lie to doctors. They hide from loved ones. They insist they're fine, even when they clearly aren't. Because to admit weakness would mean confronting failure. And that is something they simply cannot do. 17th, they begin to feel trapped in their own choices, and they hate it. For years, narcissists convinced themselves that they were untouchable, that their charm protected them, that their power kept them safe. But now, they are facing the reality of their lifestyle, the consequences of their choices, the truth they tried so hard to avoid, and they hate it. Not because they regret hurting others, not because they feel guilt, but because they feel trapped, trapped by their own decisions, trapped by the truth they can no longer deny. 18th, they start questioning everything, including their own reality. Narcissists don't handle doubt well. Their entire worldview depends on certainty, the belief that they are superior, admired and untouchable. But now, they are full of questions. Did I deserve this? Was I wrong to trust her? Did I push people away? Will I ever be the same? Of course, they don't voice these thoughts aloud, but inside they wrestle with something they've avoided for years, their own fragility. 19th, they start manipulating medical professionals to avoid the truth. Some narcissists lie to doctors. They withhold information. They fabricate stories about monogamy, protection, and personal responsibility. Because for them, truth is dangerous. Truth means accountability. And that's something they cannot allow. Psychologists explain that this behavior is rooted in shame. Narcissists fear being seen as flawed, as human, as broken. So they lie to protect their image, even in places where honesty could save them. 20th, they start using religion or spirituality to mask their failures. Some narcissists, especially those who operate within faith-based communities, begin to speak openly about redemption, repentance, and forgiveness after receiving an STD. But their sudden spiritual awakening is not real. It's strategic, designed to restore their image, to regain trust, to reclaim the high ground. They preach about purity. They speak about cleansing. They share testimonies filled with half-truths. But none of it is about healing. None of it is about true change. It's about rebuilding their brand spiritually. 21st, they start devaluing the person they believe gave them the disease, no matter how untrue it is. Whether they truly know who gave them the disease or not, narcissists will eventually settle on a scapegoat. Someone to bear the blame, someone to absorb the shame. And once they've chosen that person, they devalue them relentlessly. They spread rumors. They destroy reputations. They expose secrets. They punish mercilessly. Because for them, punishment is not justice, it's survival. It's a way to silence the shame they cannot tolerate. 22nd, they start acting out in desperation, destroying lives to distract from their own collapse. As the reality of their conditions sinks in, narcissists often lash out. They sabotage friendships. They betray confidences. They create drama wherever they go. Because chaos gives them purpose. It makes them feel alive. It reminds them that they still have the power to hurt, to confuse, and to control. And in doing so, they divert attention from their own failing health, from their own unraveling, from their own descent. 23rd, they start idealizing healthier versions of themselves, briefly before returning to old patterns. At some point, the narcissist may attempt change. They may vow to slow down, to be careful, to be honest, but it never lasts. Because deep down, they don't believe they did anything wrong. They believe they were unlucky, misled, betrayed. And so, after a short period of restraint, they return to their old ways, convinced they've learned something they haven't. 24th, they begin to envy those who remain healthy, and they take it out on them. Healthy people remind narcissists of what they've lost: control, freedom, power, peace. And when they see others thriving, happy and unburdened by disease, they feel something they rarely admit: envy. Not just jealousy, but resentment, hatred, a need to bring others down. So they target those who seem immune to their games, those who stayed away, those who saw through them early, and they do everything they can to drag them into the mess they created. 25th, they start fearing intimacy, and yet still chase attention recklessly. Ironically, after contracting an STD, narcissists often become more guarded, more cautious, more distant, but they don't stop seeking admiration. They just seek it differently. They flirt without touching. They seduce with words. They build emotional entanglements because physical ones now feel risky. And in doing so, they maintain their need for control, even if it's less direct. 26th, they begin to feel the loneliness they spent years hiding. Narcissists surround themselves with people, but true connection remains elusive. And now, with a condition that limits their options, they begin to feel something they absolutely hate: silence, loneliness, emotional emptiness, fear of rejection. And unlike most people who learn from loneliness, narcissists panic. They lash out. They reach out to old victims. They try to recreate the emotional chaos that once made them feel powerful. because to them, any kind of attention, even negative, is better than being ignored. 27th, they start blaming their parents, childhood trauma, or past relationships for a choice they made as adults. No matter how old they are, no matter how many times they repeated the same destructive patterns, narcissists rarely take ownership. Instead, they blame their upbringing. They blame past lovers. They blame society. They blame you. Because taking responsibility would mean admitting they made a mistake, that they failed, that they hurt people. And that is something they cannot afford to believe. 28th, they begin to lose trust in everyone, including themselves. STDs force narcissists to confront something they've avoided for years: betrayal. And once they start questioning who gave them the disease, they begin to doubt everything. Did she know? Did he hide it? Were they all playing a game against me? And soon, that suspicion turns inward. They begin doubting their own choices, their own instincts, their own version of events. But instead of growing from that doubt, they bury it under layers of accusation and denial. 29th, they start comparing themselves to others, not to improve, but to feel superior. Despite their condition, narcissists still find ways to believe they are better than others. They compare themselves to people who are sicker. They look for flaws in others to reassure themselves they're not the worst. They talk about how this could happen to anyone. They say, it's not that serious. They insist, everyone has something. But these statements aren't meant to normalize the experience. They're meant to lift their ego, no matter how low they've fallen. 30th, they begin to fear being forgotten, and they act out to stay relevant. Narcissists thrive on attention. Even when they're sick, they want to be seen, known, desired, so they post more. They stir up conflict. They make bold claims about their experiences. They exaggerate their suffering, all to ensure they are still seen, still talked about, still admired. Because for them, being forgotten is worse than being exposed. 31st, they begin to experience what they made you feel for years: being watched, judged, and feared. Narcissists manipulate, control, and dominate others. But now, they are the ones being watched, judged, avoided. People start distancing themselves. Mutual friends become hesitant. New partners hesitate to commit. And for the first time in a long time, the narcissist understands what it feels like to be treated like a threat. And it terrifies them. 32nd, they begin to feel what you felt for years, being trapped in their own mind. Narcissists live in a prison of their own making, a prison built from lies, control, and emotional manipulation. And now, the walls are closing in. They relive every failed relationship. They replay every accusation. They twist memories to make themselves look better. They search for someone to blame. But deep down, beneath the layers of denial, they know they are the architects of their own downfall. 33rd, they begin to question their own existence, and that leads to deeper instability. Narcissists define themselves by how others see them. When those reflections start fading, when they can no longer find people who validate their version of reality, they begin to question who they really are. Are they really as great as they told themselves? Or have they been living a lie all along? This existential crisis is rare among narcissists. Most of them never reach this stage, but for those who do, it's deeply unsettling. Because when you base your entire identity on admiration, what are you when no one admires you anymore? 34th, they start feeling what you felt for years, being betrayed by the very people they trusted. Narcissists often claim to be the real victims. They insist that everyone abandons them, that people are always turning against them, that they're misunderstood. But what they don't realize is that betrayal is not something that just happens to them. It's something they invite in. Because when you spend your life manipulating, controlling, and hurting others, you teach people how to treat you. And now, they are learning that lesson firsthand. 35th, they begin to understand that their world is changing, and they can't stop it. Despite all their efforts to regain control, despite all their attempts to rewrite their story, despite all the people they try to replace you with, nothing feels quite right. Their charm is wearing thin. Their lies are unraveling. Their manipulations are failing. And the realization is setting in. They can't fix this. They can't outrun this. They can't win this time. And for the first time in their life, they are realizing that the system they built around control is starting to collapse. 36th, they begin to feel what you felt for years, emotional suffocation. Narcissists manipulate, control, and dominate others. But what few people realize is that they also feel trapped by their own behavior. They can't form real connections. They can't open up. They can't trust anyone. They can't admit weakness. And now, they are surrounded by people who don't truly know them. People who see through them. People who walk away. And in that moment, they understand what you felt for years, the suffocating weight of emotional isolation. 37th, they begin to experience what they made you feel for years, helplessness. Narcissists make people feel powerless. They strip others of confidence, confuse them with contradictions, and leave them questioning their own reality. But now, the tables have turned. They are the ones who feel helpless. They are the ones who feel confused. They are the ones who feel betrayed. They are the ones who feel like they're losing their grip, and they don't know how to handle it, because they never learned how to deal with failure. They never learned how to process rejection. They never learned how to survive without control. And now, they're being forced to face the very emotions they spent a lifetime avoiding. 38th, they begin to understand that their power was always an illusion, and that terrifies them. Narcissists build their lives around dominance, around the belief that they are superior, that they are needed, that they are unstoppable. But now, as everything slips through their fingers, they begin to understand something they've denied for years. Their power was never real. Their control was always temporary. Their influence was always borrowed. And now it's being taken back. 39th, they begin to feel what you felt for years, being haunted by the past. Narcissists don't reflect. They rewrite. They don't heal. They bury. They don't apologize. They blame. But now, the past is returning with a vengeance. Old wounds resurface. Old betrayals catch up. Old victims speak up. Old trauma finds new ways to haunt them. And they can no longer escape the truth, because the past never forgets. And neither does karma. 40th, they begin to understand that their life was built on sand, and now it's washing away. Narcissists build their lives on shaky foundations. Relationships based on manipulation, careers built on deception, reputations formed through charisma rather than integrity. And now, those foundations are crumbling. They are losing jobs. They are losing lovers. They are losing friends. They are losing control. And with each loss, they feel something they've avoided for years: helplessness. So if you've recognized any of these truths in your own journey, know this: you are not weak. You are not broken. You are simply recovering from something far more complex than most people understand. You were never chosen because you were vulnerable. You were chosen because you had something real, something valuable, something they needed. Whether it was your empathy, your strength, or your independence, you brought something into their world that they could never create for themselves. And now, you have the chance to reclaim that strength and use it for yourself, for your healing, for your growth, and for the life you deserve to live. A life free from manipulation. A life free from control. A life where your worth is not questioned, your emotions are not twisted, and your strength is not diminished. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this message meaningful or helpful, please consider taking just a few seconds to like, subscribe, and share this content with others who may be going through something similar. Awareness is the first step toward healing. Understanding the dynamics between you and the narcissist in your life helps you see the full picture, not just the pain, but the transformation that follows. Remember, you are not alone. You are not weak. You are not damaged. You are simply human, recovering from something far more complex than most people understand. Keep moving forward. Trust your instincts, and never forget that your strength is real and it belongs to you now, fully and completely. Stay strong, stay aware, and always remember, you are not alone.